A ship disappears off the coast of the UAE, just like that. Boarded, taken, and last seen heading toward Iran. No nation has claimed responsibility, no crew statements, no official explanation. But there's something else, something that makes this incident far more alarming than a routine maritime seizure. According to a report citing a risk management firm, this wasn't an ordinary cargo ship. It was a floating armory. And right now, nobody officially knows who has it or what was on board. Here's what we know with certainty as of Thursday, May 14th, 2026. The United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations, known as UKMTO, is the British military body responsible for monitoring vessel safety across the Persian Gulf region. They issued an alert confirming that a ship had been boarded and, in their own words, taken by unauthorized personnel. The vessel was approximately 38 nautical miles northeast of the UAE's Fujairah oil export terminal when the boarding occurred. Fujairah. That's not a minor port. It is one of the most strategically critical oil export hubs on the planet, positioned right at the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow choke point through which a significant portion of the world's oil supply flows every single day. After the seizure, UKMTO reported the ship was spotted moving toward Iranian territorial waters. British authorities have not publicly identified who carried out the boarding. They have not named the crew's nationality. They have not confirmed the vessel's cargo. What the BBC reported, citing the risk management company Vanguard, is that the Honduras-flagged vessel named the Hui Chuan was the ship taken, and that its operators described it as a floating armory used by other ships in the strait to defend themselves from pirate attacks. This story is moving fast, and the implications run deep. If you want fact-based international coverage without the noise, subscribe now, because this one is going to keep developing. Let's walk through exactly what unfolded Thursday morning as clearly as the confirmed reporting allows. The Strait of Hormuz is the world's most critical maritime corridor. At its narrowest point, it measures roughly 21 miles wide. 2 shipping lanes, each just 2 miles across. Through those lanes passes approximately 1/5 of all the oil traded globally on any given day. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, and Iran all depend on this corridor to export their energy to markets in Asia, Europe, and beyond. The vessel UKMTO flagged was 38 nautical miles northeast of the UAE's Fujairah terminal, well within the strategic zone surrounding the strait's entrance. That location is not random. Ships anchoring in that area often do so because they're waiting to transit, conducting crew transfers, or, as in this case, allegedly, providing security services to passing vessels. The BBC, citing risk management company Vanguard, reported that the ship's operators told Vanguard the Hui Chuan was operating as a floating armory, a vessel that stores weapons, particularly small arms and non-lethal deterrents, which are rented out to commercial ships to help crews defend themselves against pirates. That's a legal practice in international waters. Floating armories exist in a gray zone of maritime law. They allow commercial ships to be armed without ever technically importing weapons into any nation's sovereign territory. For years, they've operated quietly in high-risk maritime zones like the Gulf of Aden and the Indian Ocean. Now one has allegedly been seized. UKMTO confirmed the vessel was taken by unauthorized personnel and was spotted heading toward Iranian territorial waters after the seizure. British authorities have declined to officially identify the attackers. No nation has come forward. No group has claimed the act. But context matters enormously here. This is at least the 3rd ship seizure in the Strait of Hormuz region since February. In April, Iranian forces were reported to have seized 2 other vessels, the Panamanian-flagged MSC Francesca and the Epaminondas, in the strait itself. That brings the confirmed or reported seizure count in just a few months to 3. The pattern is unmistakable, even if no single incident carries ironclad attribution. And the timing of Thursday's incident carries its own weight. The seizure occurred while President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping were meeting in Beijing, a summit where the Strait of Hormuz and Iran's behavior were among the key agenda items. Trump's administration had been actively pressing Beijing to use its diplomatic influence over Tehran to stabilize the waterway. A ship seized, heading toward Iran. On the same morning, world leaders are discussing exactly this pressure point. That's not a coincidence anyone in a diplomatic briefing room would dismiss. Here's the part nobody's really talking about yet. If this vessel truly was a floating armory, a ship carrying weapons designed to help other ships fight back, then whoever took it may now have access to exactly the kind of materiel that's used to defend against them. That's not a minor footnote. That is a reversal. To understand why this incident carries consequences far beyond a single ship and a single day, you need to understand what the Strait of Hormuz actually represents. This is not just geography, it is leverage. Roughly 17 to 20% of globally traded oil passes through this channel, approximately 17 million barrels per day by historical estimates. The countries that depend most on that flow include Japan, South Korea, India, and China. China alone receives a substantial share of its oil imports through this corridor, which is precisely why the Trump-Xi summit was happening when it was happening. The United States has been dealing with a months-long pattern of what analysts describe as Iranian pressure tactics in and around the strait. Alongside the ship seizures, Iran has reportedly deployed small submarines to the area, vessels that, while limited in capability, create surveillance and tracking headaches for international naval forces operating nearby. The seizure of a floating armory adds a new dimension. If the weapons on board are now in Iranian hands, and that remains unconfirmed because no one has officially said who took this ship, the implications shift. Iran would possess not just a seized vessel, but intelligence on the security systems commercial ships are using, the weapons themselves, documentation of which ships contracted with the Armory, potentially the identities of armed security contractors. For shipping companies, for insurers, for the maritime security industry, this is precisely the kind of incident that raises premiums, delays transits, and forces rerouting decisions. And rerouting away from the Strait of Hormuz is not a simple matter. The alternative, sailing around the southern tip of Africa, adds roughly 2 weeks to journey times. For oil tankers, for container ships, for the companies waiting on their cargo, that's not an abstraction. That's money. That's supply chain disruption. That's delayed deliveries and price pressures that eventually reach ordinary consumers. Do you think this situation escalates further in the coming weeks? Or have we reached the ceiling of what Iran is willing to risk? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know what you think. Now here's a contradiction that deserves more attention. The ship the BBC identified as the Hui Chuan is Honduras-flagged, Honduras, a Central American nation with no obvious stake in Persian Gulf maritime security. Like many commercial vessels, it likely uses a flag of convenience, registering in a nation with favorable shipping regulations rather than the country its operators actually call home. That layer of legal ambiguity is itself a challenge for any response. Whose ship is it legally? Who bears responsibility for its crew? Which government demands answers? And if its operators were based elsewhere, in Europe, in Asia, in the Gulf itself, the diplomatic lines become tangled fast. Nobody has untangled them yet. Here's what makes this particular incident different from the ones that came before it. Previous ship seizures in the strait involved cargo vessels, ships carrying goods, with crews that became, effectively, leverage. This vessel was allegedly a weapons platform, purpose-built for maritime security.
If the seizure was deliberate, if whoever boarded this ship knew exactly what they were taking, then this wasn't opportunism. It was targeting. It was intelligence-led. Someone knew what the Hui Chuan was carrying, knew its position, and moved on it precisely because of what it contained. That is a fundamentally different kind of operation than stopping a tanker at gunpoint. Step back from the geopolitics for a moment, because at the center of this story, there are people. The crew of the Hui Chuan, whoever they are, however many, whatever their nationalities, found themselves boarded at sea by people they couldn't have anticipated. In the early hours of a Thursday morning, in waters 38 nautical miles from the nearest significant port, their vessel was taken from under them. We don't know what they experienced. British authorities have released no crew information. No distress call has been publicly reported. No statements from family members have emerged.
The silence around the human element of this story is, in its own way, deeply unsettling. That silence is not unusual in this region. When Iran seized the MSC Francesca and the Epaminondas in April, crew information was similarly slow to emerge. These incidents play out in a kind of information vacuum, where governments carefully control the narrative, ship operators stay quiet to protect negotiations, and the crews themselves are cut off from the outside world. For the families of merchant sailors operating in this corridor right now, every hour without communication carries its own weight. And think about what it means to be part of the merchant maritime community in this region in May 2026. You sign a contract, you board a ship. You know, because the industry knows, that the Strait of Hormuz has become a place where vessels simply disappear into Iranian custody, where your ship could become a bargaining chip in a dispute that has nothing to do with you, your cargo, or your voyage plan. The International Maritime Organization tracks seafarer welfare. Industry groups have been raising concerns for months about the risk environment in the Persian Gulf. Insurance rates for ships transiting the strait have climbed. Some companies have begun requiring naval escort requests. Others have altered routing. But routing changes and insurance premiums are abstractions for the person standing a watch on the bridge of a commercial vessel somewhere between Fujairah and the open ocean. There is also the UAE dimension. Fujairah, the port terminal 38 nautical miles from where this seizure occurred, is a critical node in the global oil trade. The UAE has positioned itself as a stable, open commercial hub in a complicated region. It hosts global logistics companies, major banks, and a significant international business presence. When an incident like this happens that close to Fujairah's waters, the question isn't just strategic, it's practical. Port workers, logistics coordinators, fuel suppliers, vessel agents, the entire ecosystem that keeps Fujairah functioning as a trade hub exists because the surrounding waters are presumed to be navigable. Each seizure erodes that presumption slightly. Shipping companies that call at Fujairah regularly are now running assessments. How close was that incident to our transit route? What's our exposure? Do we need additional security clearance before our next vessel enters the zone? Those questions don't generate headlines, but they drive decisions that ripple outward, through freight rates, through energy pricing, through the cost of goods that end up in supermarkets and factories and fuel stations far from any ocean. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a military problem, it is an economic one. And the people who feel its instability most acutely are not generals or diplomats. They're sailors, port workers, truckers, consumers, the long, invisible chain that connects a narrow strip of water to everyday life across the planet. The questions accumulating around this incident don't have easy answers. If the vessel was seized by Iranian forces, and no one has officially confirmed that, does the United States respond? Does the UK demand accountability through UKMTO? Do the UAE or other Gulf states escalate their own naval posture? And crucially, if this ship was indeed a floating armory, what does whoever now holds it do with what's on board? Does it disappear into a port somewhere, its contents cataloged? Does it become a bargaining chip in the ongoing nuclear negotiations between Iran and Western powers? Or does the silence continue? The ship, the crew, and its cargo fading into the same ambiguity that has defined every other seizure in these waters. The next 48 to 72 hours will be telling. There is a pattern forming in the Persian Gulf that goes beyond any single incident, and this seizure is the latest piece of it. Since February, at least 3 vessels have been seized or reported seized in or near the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has publicly announced the deployment of small submarines to the area, a move that serves more as a signal than a genuine military threat. But signals matter. The Trump administration has been navigating simultaneous nuclear negotiations with Tehran while dealing with what looks, from the outside, like a methodical campaign of maritime pressure. The seizure of a floating armory, if confirmed to be deliberate and targeted, represents an escalation in the sophistication of that campaign. It's one thing to stop a tanker to make a point. It's another to identify and board a vessel specifically because of its cargo, in the middle of active diplomatic talks, in waters being monitored by the British military. The Beijing timing is impossible to ignore. The Trump-Xi summit was addressing, among other things, Iran's behavior and the stability of the Strait of Hormuz. China imports enormous quantities of oil through this corridor. Beijing has economic incentives to keep the waterway stable, but also diplomatic leverage over Tehran that it has been slow to exercise. What intelligence services will be looking at now? Who knew what the Hui Chuan was? Who passed that information to whom? Was this a planned operation or an opportunistic encounter? And where is the vessel right now? The UKMTO's job is to track and warn. They saw it heading toward Iranian waters. What happens once it's in those waters is outside their mandate. For the maritime industry, the calculus is shifting. Floating armories exist precisely because the threat environment in certain waterways demands that commercial ships be armed. If those armories are now themselves becoming targets, if the very ships providing defensive weapons to the merchant fleet can be seized, then the security model for navigating high-risk corridors needs to be rethought entirely. That is not a small adjustment. It touches insurance markets, private security contracts, international maritime law, and the diplomatic arrangements that govern the use of weapons at sea. The broader question, the one that doesn't have an answer yet, is where this ends. Iran has been under sustained pressure, militarily from U.S. strikes on its navy and missile infrastructure in recent months, economically from sanctions, diplomatically from the nuclear talks. The maritime seizures may be one of the few remaining tools available to apply counterpressure without crossing into direct military confrontation. But every seized ship is a new variable. Every vessel that goes missing in these waters raises the temperature slightly for the next ship's captain, the next shipping company's board, the next government's foreign ministry. The Hui Chuan is one ship. Its seizure is one incident, but it sits inside a pattern that is becoming harder to read as anything other than deliberate, calculated, and escalating. Who blinked first in the Gulf of Oman on Thursday morning? We don't know yet. And that uncertainty, who did this, why they chose this vessel, what they intend to do with it, is itself the story. The answers, when they come, will tell us something important about what phase of this standoff we've actually entered. This is not a story that ends with today's reporting. The vessel's location, its crew, its cargo, none of that has been officially resolved. The diplomatic fallout from the Trump-Xi summit and how it intersects with this incident is still developing. And the broader question of who controls the waters around the world's most critical oil corridor is one that's going to define the coming months. What do you think happens next? Does this trigger a direct response? Or does it get absorbed quietly into the ongoing negotiations? Drop your take in the comments. I genuinely want to know where you think this is headed. And subscribe if you want to be here when the next development breaks. Because in a corridor this volatile, the next one won't be far off.